Mark Carney says we stand.
Good day. Today is April 2nd, 2025. I am Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm joined, as usual, by Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford.
Dragged myself away from the Trump show just to be here.
It was pretty good.
It was good.
And Western Standard senior Alberta columnist Cory Morgan.
Always a pleasure.
Unusually joining us today is Western Standard's energy and business reporter Shaun Polczer.
On T-Day.
You know, there's so much stuff. We're going to be talking about pipelines today, which is pretty damn good for the pipeline. So we got to bring in the man who lays the most pipe around here. All right.
That was a compliment.
How was that for a segue? All right. We're going to talk about Liberation Day. Today, Trump has declared today to be Liberation Day, a extensive list of retaliatory tariffs or reciprocal tariffs against many U.S. trading partners. Did Canada dodge a bullet? We might have. We're going to talk about it. Mark Carney had been sounding a bit more pragmatic earlier about perhaps it would be a good idea for Canada to be able to, ship oil across the country without going through the United States during a trade war. Well, he's reversed his position on that. Nope. No more. The No More Pipelines bill is going to stay, and therefore, pretty much, that's going to mean no more pipelines. Oh boy, this is a great one. Pierre Poilievre talked about the need for young couples to be able to afford a home before they're collecting CPP and women's biological clocks run out. That apparently is so very racist or misogynistic or transphobic or something. I don't really know what the
Unacceptable.
Very unacceptable.
Yes.
But been roundly pilloried by liberals and New Democrats and unemployed fake news TV personalities. We'll be talking about that. Before we get started, though, I'm going to thank my favorite sponsor, New World Precious Metals, based right here in Alberta. Years of inflationary money printing and rising debts have decimated the average Canadian's savings. Gold and silver are the only currencies that have held their value for thousands of years. Last year saw 30% gains. New World Precious Metals offers unique platforms to help protect and grow your hard-earned wealth with gold and silver. Check them out at newworldpm.com. All right. Let's start off with the biological clock that is ticking. Before actually you get into it, why don't we just roll the clip of the very offensive, misogynistic, racist, transphobic thing that Pierre Poilievre had to say.
I'm sorry, I may have to avert my eyes.
This parental discretion is strongly advised. The following clip is very graphic and offensive.
We will not forget that young 36-year-old couple whose biological clock is running out faster than they can afford to buy a home and have kids.
All right, well, you heard it there. Pierre Poilievre hates women because he wants them to be able to afford a house while they're still capable of bearing children. Nigel, tell us why this is so very effeminate.
Well, it's liberal hate and rage, isn't it? I mean, the story here is that he was in New Brunswick. The question came up about housing policy. He's been big about housing policy, so is Mr. Carney. Very legitimate subject. And he made the point that many young people, by the time they've saved up for a house, it's too late to have children. The biological clock has run out, he said. Well, that was this week's estrogen moment. All these hostile liberal women who, can I actually even use that phrase, gents?
Hostile liberal.
What is a woman?
You could just call them feminists.
Or well, I was
Fembots.
more referring to the estrogen moment. But anyway, look, whatever you want to call it, all the people who, were never going to vote for Poilievre anyway, came out and said he was a nasty man because he was making these patronizing comments about the biological clock. Men aren't supposed to talk about that. I don't know how you sort of refer to, I suppose you could think of something, but we have to be able to talk to each other, and there are certain comments. So we all know what the biological clock is. The only thing that I would fault Mr. Poilievre on this one is the assumption that you have to own your house before you can have children. I happen to know that I was not conceived or raised in a house that my parents owned.
It was the back of a van, I heard.
That was
You're driving.
that was NDP propaganda.
It was a James Bond movie. That's why my name is Shaun. I was named that.
Well, there you are. But look, that's the way the young people want to do it these days. They want to, first they move in together, then they have the wedding, and then they buy the house, or they buy the house and then they have the wedding. Once all that is taken care of and paid for, now we're ready to start. It's one approach. It's not one that I would endorse, but it's the way they do it. And that's what Mr. Poilievre was speaking to when he made the general point that, look, by the time they're ready, it's too late. The clock has run out. And that brought down all kinds of hate and calumny on him. I have to just sort of give Amy Ham, who's come into the news for other reasons, I want to give her credit for really summing this up beautifully. She said, she put this on Twitter, suddenly when you're more outraged by, actually this is Lisa Raitt, when you're more outraged by a Conservative MP using the term biological clock than by a Liberal MP encouraging the turning in of a Canadian citizen to a foreign government in exchange for a bounty, you have lost the plot. She is so right. That is exactly where these people have landed up. That's the story.
All right. We're not going to get... I'm going to talk about her later in my parting shots, Cory. But, one of the most hilarious over-the-top reactions was now unemployed former CTV very fair fact-checker, Rachel Gilmore. She says it was misogynistic. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but I do know she used the term. It was misogynistic. I resisted the urge to say, someone's clock's taken. On their employment? I don't know. On something. There was a lot of angry liberal men, of course, supporting angry liberal women who appear to have let their clock run out. Very upset about this. This seemed to almost strike a very personal tone for a lot of progressivist feminists out there.
We got to remember the old maid cat ladies were the last remaining strong support demographic for Justin Trudeau when he left. They were perhaps waiting for him to help their clock out before it ran out.
Oh, we're going to have to add that one to the list, production.
But I mean, just the insensitivity, fine. You got to watch it when the liberal gotcha games are going. And Poilievre should have watched it when you use any term when it comes to women's issues. But it's funny with progressives, was it Mark Holland who was saying we should be all talking more about women's menstruation because they do have an official menstruation day? I mean, it's absurd and ridiculous. If you look it up, one of the cabinet ministers did talk about that in the House of Commons.
Well, they're for the same people who believe men can menstruate.
Yeah, and that had a big ick factor, but it didn't lead to the hornets circling or going mad over that. Mm-hmm. Men should stay away from talking about or opining, I guess, on what a woman should do with her own issues, which are unique, because they're just going to run into trouble. But I mean, the hypersensitivity and the faux outrage. I mean, if some woman wanted to come up and discuss my prostate issues, she probably couldn't speak very well on them, and I would find it weird to talk about, but I wouldn't lose my mind over it.
More on the air, Corey. Tell us more about your prostate.
Well, I mean, I posted my colonoscopy issue pictures of the past, too.
You're always keeping it classy.
I like to save, sharing every...
Trading cards, we could share them.
Trading
Mine up there as well.
Okay, you know what? That's going to be, we're launching some new membership levels. I'm thinking we were thinking, what's the value adds?
If we're planning to lose some members of it.
The 15th. Cory Morgan trading cards. That's going to be great.
And that's what I mean. This is just an issue just for light conversation as far as I'm concerned. The only outrage is from the usual suspects trying to make something out of nothing. At worst, it was a bit of a poor taste at worst, if that. And
I don't think there is
I didn't hear.
It's just stating they don't be as facts.
yeah, I mean, just the term biological clock. But what are you supposed to say? You praise it a little better if you're being careful. You say you want to move on and start your family as, at a younger point in life, and having a home established might make that easier. I mean, there's ways you could say it without biological clock, even though it's not all that inaccurate a term for it. It's been a well accepted for a long time.
Shaun, your biological clock is ticking. Sure. I think the most offensive part here was not clock. It was the word biological. Biological is a very triggering word for a lot of people right now. Like biological men, biological women. That there are such birthing persons.
I just thought about it, I don't have to worry.
People who menstruate, because we can't talk about the word women. Perhaps it was just for a lot of us, we just take it very for granted that there are objective facts in science like biology. And it's perhaps just rude to mention the biological reality that humans, men too, although we've got a bit more leeway on matter, but that there are biological realities and that it is factual that women can only give birth between certain ages.
Well, I sat in on a presentation in Banff at the Global Business Forum probably about a year and a half ago, and I believe it was the head of Nanos. And he was talking about that very thing, demographics is destiny. So, and he was talking about the aging of the population in general, but also women specifically. That, once you get a certain category of women over the age of 40, your the fertility rate of the nation goes down, right? So that is just a fact, and you make it up with immigration or whatever way you can. And Canada is not even the worst in this regard. Like Japan, there's a lot of countries that are facing demographic crises. Russia is another one, basically with the war, but there it's a different thing because you have biologically aged reproductive men that are disappearing from the spectrum there. Like there's about 1 million of them that have just been completely wiped out here in the last
Although you want less men to reproduce in a society, but that's assuming, like we're colonizing Mars and the men have a rather, advantageous relationship. Yes. Yeah. I get myself
Some more comments off.
I'm oh god, I can't wait to see the comments section. You know what? A production, make sure we tag some of the craziest people on the Twitter sphere on this. We got to clip some of the best parts of this out, just about biological fact, and just tag some of the right people, and we can place bets on how long it takes their heads to explode. But also, this is 2025. Wokeness is dying. Like the culture war has turned decisively. It's not dead. Woke is still there. It's still alive, but it's being pushed out of the mainstream back into the faculty lounges where if it belongs anywhere, that's the only place it belongs. I just don't see, Nigel, how this is in any way a winning strategy for the Liberals. Because if we make this selection about woke and whatnot, kind of going back to the old issue set, pre-Trump trade war stuff, which was decisively favoring the Conservatives, where people are done with this crap.
right.
Yeah, I'll talk about it.
I just find it beyond belief that the Liberals are trying to say that Pierre shouldn't talk about this. He shouldn't talk about the biological clock. These are the same people who a few years go demand everyone show their personal health record. Right. Before being allowed to go to a restaurant or anywhere else,
It's true. I still have it on my phone.
I think it's
It's a scan code, the QR.
I may be quoting somebody off Twitter here, but I saw this and I thought, well, that puts it into perfect context. Once it is in their favor, they all start to believe in biology again. These people don't deserve to get a single vote. I'm sure they will, but it's.
Well, biological reality bothers them to a degree too. I guess there's some inherent unfairness about it. That's the way it is. Like that, women tend to have an expiration date when it comes to that aspect that men aren't necessarily stuck with. Well, I look forward to the emails. It's fine.
You're in trouble.
But I mean, you got Robert De Niro proudly seeding a garden in the age of 80 or so, and that's all right apparently.
But
But
the real man, you see.
It's just the way it is. Take it up with the creator of Turtle Island or whatever your woke progressive ideas are with things. To point it out isn't being cruel. It's just, again, as we say, biological reality, but we're not supposed to accept reality or speak of it. Well, get over it, girl.
We should give Pierre a pass on this.
I think so.
Okay. Well, today is, according to U.S. President Donald Trump, Liberation Day. This is the day where he is put in place a long list of retaliatory tariffs against other countries that he believes, and the U.S. administration believes.
Well, not retaliatory, it's reciprocal.
Reciprocal.
Right.
Reciprocal.
He's being kind. These are kind. This is not revenge. This is just.
Well, I'm throwing it to you now, Shaun, to kind of explain. We just saw what it was today. There's still a lot to make sense of it, but out of the bit we know in this short period of time, try to sum up what Liberation Day was all about and what happened.
Do you want good news or bad news?
Give us the good first.
Well, the good news is that Canada wound up off of his list. He's basically declared economic war on the whole entire world, except for I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, the shit kicking that we've already taken on the fentanyl tariffs and the automobile tariffs.
We can do S-bombs on this show.
Okay. So, as far as that goes, I mean, he made a point on the White House lawn of trashing both Canada and Mexico for, what did he say, cheating and assault.
Taking advantage of the
Raping and pillaging, indeed. Yeah. But then at the end of the day, we got off kind of scot-free. Compared to China, which he estimated deserved a 67% tariff, but only got 34%. Poor little old Vietnam, who he claimed to like very much, even though I guess he avoided the draft back in the day. 90%.
He liked them. He didn't want to go kill them.
Right. He didn't want to kill them. Right. So, and people who did were out of their minds. They were crazy, right?
Yeah.
Taiwan, 64%. UK only got 10%. India, 52%. Anyway, it kind of comes down to what you think the calculation of what an actual tariff is, because he's including currency manipulation, value-added sales taxes, or what he calls currency manipulation, right? Value-added sales taxes and whatever else, regulation. I guess in Canada it would be the French official bilingualism as a trade barrier, because companies, you remember Target when they had to put French on their pizza boxes or Target brand. And it basically wiped them right out of the Canadian market. They couldn't do it. So, no direct energy tariffs for Alberta. So that's good. Most of the stuff that we send to the States is under the U.S. Free Trade Agreement. Dave just sent me a note here that said, who calls USMCA compliant. For those who don't know, USMCA is NAFTA 3.0. Goods were not subject to any tariffs. So I don't know. We'll just have to wake up tomorrow to see, whether he changes his mind or not.
Cory, it looks to me like we dodged a bullet. I mean, but there are already tariffs against Canada here. There's most of them are kind of on a stay of execution at this point. Steel and aluminum is still in place, but that's a global tariff.
Automobile is going to be big too.
Yeah. The automobile tariffs, that'll hit Canada possibly more than anyone.
Because every time it crosses the border, it's going to get taxed.
Well, not necessarily. The details of that are not really worked out yet.
It's confusing because you had me on that column piece about the GST on the automobiles, and that is a major sticking point because the U.S. does not have a sales tax. And apparently these cars, when they come from Europe, the automakers get rebated the VAT back, which is another point of contention that, so these may actually even be legitimate grievances.
So, I mean, some of what Trump is doing with Canada is not very legitimate in terms of a trade policy. If the goal is, in fact, to have open trade,
Right.
It's either something else or it's just not making any sense to anyone. But some of these trade barriers, Cory, I think, are legitimate. He's talking about, with Europe, the value-added tax, which is like their essentially super GST. But with us, the GST acts somewhat like a trade barrier. He mentioned our supply-managed dairy and egg sectors, which, Mark Carney said, everything is on the table, including an export embargo against Alberta and Saskatchewan oil. Apparently, what is not on the table, and he explicitly said it's off the table, is supply management. And both Pierre Poilievre said the same in different words.
Cheese cards.
Yeah. Yep. Very dangerous terrorists. Cheese
Right.
cards. Yeah. Yes. And then we've got, as you said, Shaun, the language barriers, like requiring bilingual packaging, which is for a lot of, especially smaller American companies, but even big ones like Target, but smaller ones, it's just not worth it for them. So they don't come into the Canadian market.
Well, that's not an economic policy, though. That's more like he's attacking like a social policy.
Well, it's a social policy that acts as a non-tariff trade barrier. And so, Cory, I think, he's wrong on some fronts, but he's got a strong point on a few of these things. And I think he's trying to finally kind of stay out of the Canadian election, realizing that he's inserted himself in a very big way that could result in a continued socialist government in Canada.
I don't know if he really cares what we have as a government in Canada, to be honest. But, I mean, he didn't add more to what's already going on in Canada. That's the success, we could call it, for the time being. But I mean, he's mercurial. We don't know what he's going to say tomorrow or next week either. But today's big announcements, he was going after the whole rest of the world besides Canada and Mexico, but probably because he was already on our case on a number of things. The supply management, it's garbage. I mean, we've gone on about that policy for years, and no federal politician will ever have the cojones to take that on, because
none of them get elected. They're afraid of Quebec. Yeah.
So we're at an impasse on that one, and we'll see what happens, particularly in the automotive, and we don't know what his demands are still, because they move. I mean, he talks about eliminating the $200 billion subsidy to Canada, which is a trade deficit, and he's just BSing when he says that.
It's not a subsidy.
It's not even a trade deficit. It's a number that he's just made up out of the air.
But so how do we get out of these when he moves the goalposts? And that's where the problems are, because he says they're reciprocal tariffs. Okay, well, what if we said we're going to get rid of supply management right now? Okay, now what? I mean, with the automotive, he's saying the only way to get out of that is to move your plant to the United States, not a matter of dropping tariffs. So are you actually looking to snipe businesses from here and bring them down there? Well, that's a problem then. That's getting a little more predatory. I'm not comforted with where he went today. I'm just happy that he didn't add more, but we didn't really see clarity. It's just, I guess, clarity that he definitely is moving towards a very introverted nation that really wants to stop trade with the rest of the world. And I tell you, the ones who should be most scared right now are American consumers, because, I mean, whether you like China or not, they're going to find out, because you drive in the States, you see a dollar store every 6 blocks. And the pajama people who go to those for their general shopping, when they see a 25-30% increase in all the goods that they buy at those, are going to become pretty upset. And those are the ones flying those Trump flags on their front porches that are falling apart. We'll see how long that support stays, because when it hits you in the pocketbook, you're not going to suddenly have an American manufacturer of toothbrushes and cheap electronic goods and those phones. It's not going to happen overnight.
Well, I'm noticing that the businesses aren't exactly that pleased either. So we've got aftermarket trading numbers here. NASDAQ down 450, Dow futures down 206. Implied open for the Dow tomorrow morning, down 453 points. NASDAQ futures implied open in the morning down 600 points. So it's not just the consumers that don't like these, it's the actual businesses themselves.
Nigel, why no Canada? No Canada. Maybe that would have been a better, maybe that's a better title. No Canada. Is it because, the reason we're not in it is because he's already targeted us and kind of got that trade war going to maybe move the goalposts wherever it is he's actually trying to go? Who knows? Or is it he's trying to, as I mentioned with Cory, you think he's trying to unmeddle himself a bit from the Canadian election to take place?
Well, we don't know what passed between him and Mark Carney when they had their famous phone call there, and but I did notice that, and I bring this forward again, that Mr. Trump said that after the election, he and Mark Carney would sort things out. Now, I don't know what he knows that we don't know about Mr. Carney's chances, but anyway, that's what he said. And I relate the lack of interest in Canada in this afternoon's announcements to some kind of agreement, perhaps, between the two of them to just lay low for the period.
Are you suggesting election interference, Nigel?
Yeah, is this perhaps
Conspiracy?
did they come to an agreement with what precisely Danielle Smith said, which is stay out of the election and keep the tariff stuff away until we're done?
Well,
you would possibly be implying that.
Well, I couldn't possibly be implying it. I could be stating it outright. But at any rate, you know, when we say we don't really know what Trump is up to, I think there's such a sort of a cloud of flying words out there that it is hard to pick it up. But he said a couple of things that make me think that there is a strategy going on here, and it is discernible. Trump is thinking back to 1941, when America was the arsenal of democracy. Didn't matter what you wanted, they could make it. And they were a nation ready for war. And when they joined the Second World War, that was the end for the Axis powers. It took a few years, but that was the moment when the world turned in favor of the Western Alliance. That's not how it is in America these days. Everything needs a computer chip. They don't make computer chips. Well, they make a few, but their weapons depend on computer chips. Their cars depend on computer chips. Ask me about it. I got one. He wants to make America what it was in 1941, the country that is totally able to look after its own needs in this day and age. And that is the strategy behind bringing production of motor vehicles into the lower 48. It is what justifies bringing in the chip plants from Taiwan. It is what he quoted a number this afternoon. 90,000 factories have closed in the last 30 years.
I have no idea.
Well, it's
That's some realism.
Quibble
about what I wouldn't hold him to any of it, but
you know, I would on that one, because you only got to drive through some of the areas of we call it the Rust Belt. Why do we call it the Rust Belt? There's line after line, block after block of places where people were working and producing stuff that other people bought, but they aren't anymore. Well, he's going to change that.
you know who he channeled in his talk today was Franklin Roosevelt. So that's a very good point. And do you know what the most important strategic manufacturing item was in 1941?
Tell us, Shaun.
Vacuum tube.
Yep.
For military purposes, every country wanted to be self-sufficient in vacuum tubes so that they could put them in their radios and in their
Anyway,
bombers. And
so amidst all the flutter and the flying words, I do think that those stand out. I think that's what the game is. So if you look at it that way, probably having Canada handy and the motor plants just across the river. I mean, they'd rather have them south of the river, but it's not going to be a sticking point in the end because you can still get there, and Canada's not going to say no.
well, you're just moving the factories across the river, right?
Well, you could, but you don't even have to, because if you really need them, we know where they are.
That's what he's going to come up with that. It's going to be his own idea. He's going to, you know what? We're just across the boat.
Yeah. All right. I want to turn this episode of The Pipeline towards pipelines. So Mark Carney has, when he was running for Liberal leader, sounded much more pragmatic and less dogmatic than Justin Trudeau on pipelines. Anyone who's seen the now famous map, cueing people in that Alberta oil doesn't actually go across Canada. It goes into Saskatchewan, comes south, goes to the United States, and then up the Great Lakes, back into Eastern Canada. So you can't really just shut it off. And that proved to be not just an economic problem in good times, but to be quite the strategic conundrum when we're in a trade war. So, and actually they turned out to be a bit lucky for Alberta because the East can't turn off the West soil because they'll be cutting them off from themselves.
Well, and the Lake Michigan project, the tunnel, is being fast-tracked by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It's becoming a priority.
So he started saying, yeah, you know what, we need an east-west pipeline even through Quebec. And strongly implying, I think, after his meeting with Alberta Premier Daniel Smith, that he would revisit the so-called No More Pipelines Act. And he's flipped on that in the last 24 hours, hasn't he, Shaun?
Yes, indeed, he has. Yeah, when he came out of that meeting with Premier Smith, he said, I'm pragmatic. I'm a pragmatic liberal. But yet, even today, while I was writing up the story, I was telling Cory, like, I did a double take because I was writing up about his Brookfield pipeline, buying up the largest gasoline pipeline in the United States. And then at the same time, questioner asked him about Bill C-69. He said, no, it's still on the table. Well, if you have C-69, you don't have a pipeline west anyway. And if you're going to cave into the whims of the Parti Québécois in Quebec and say no pipelines crossing Quebec, even though that pipeline is already in the ground, it just has to go from Montreal to St. John. Mm-hmm. Okay? Well, then you've basically eliminated the prospect of pipelines.
Cory, this is a hell of a flip-flop. It's a pretty defining issue. It's a very important issue before all this went down. Now it seems like national economic and energy suicide to want to keep the No More Pipelines Act in place. Because there's not going to be an Energy East or Energy East equivalent pipeline if that legislation is still in place. Where's he going with this?
He's lying. He's lying.
In which direction?
I don't think he wants that pipe. He's still a net zero ideologue. He is making his money from, investing in pipelines in the United States. He wants to win the election, so he will pander to Quebec. He will say he's pragmatic and he'll get a pipeline across. But your average Canadian citizen also doesn't know that there is not going to be a pipeline built across this country as long as C-69 exists. Go to Toronto and ask your average citizen what C-69 is. They won't know what the heck it is. And they won't know that it is what makes it impossible to get a pipeline across this country. Carney knows darn well, because that legislation was crafted to end major energy infrastructure projects from conventional oil and gas across the country. That was the basis of it. We knew that then. Trudeau knew it then. And we've been fighting it because of that ever since. So for Carney to come out and say that he supports pipelines while he still supports C-69, no, I mean, I guess he could be lying about one of the two, but he's lying. And he's not being called out on it either. And that, aside from outlets like us, and that's the other frustrating thing in this.
The irony for me is that we're not even talking about the emissions cap. The emissions / production cap that he had to correct his own environment minister to say that it wasn't a production cap, when that's exactly what he said in the interview. And then they went back and, whatever, redacted it, right? So now it's almost like we can live with an emissions cap. But how are we going to do it without a pipe?
So, Cory, to your point about people in the East don't know what the Bill C-69 does, so they don't know that it stops pipelines. There's a lot of people, even out west, who don't realize that Bill C-69 does not only apply to pipelines.
A lot of projects.
You want to build a dock. You want to build a mine. You want the Ring of Fire, which Mr. Poilievre was talking about there. All of that is subject to review through the agencies established under Bill C-69. That bill is actually a national non-development legislation. Keep things as they are. Don't let anything move ahead unless the government itself wants it. And that is why it's got to go. It's not just because we don't like it out here. If anybody in Ontario read that legislation and understood what it meant, they would want it gone too.
Oh, absolutely.
And in Quebec.
Especially as a resource-based country. I mean, we're a natural, get over it. That's something I think that the Liberals just can't understand or won't accept we're not going to be a giant provider of finished products. It can't happen. We don't have the type of development for it. We don't have the type of economy for it. We're a resource exporting
Cory,
country.
it's not that they don't understand.
No.
They understand very
Well,
well,
like accepting it.
but they actually want it that way. They want Canada to be one vast national park.
We'll call the alley a navigable water body.
Yes.
We were talking about that.
Shaun, Cory made the point that, Carney is a fanatical net zero guy. It's in his book. That's where he's at. He is
It's not a secret.
He's hard against this stuff. And he's going to keep in place the No More Pipelines Act here, emissions/production cap, a lot of these things. But his actions at Brookfield show that he's not so quite opposed to pipelines. He's for pipelines, at least where they've been outside of Canada. If you're a global warming crusader, it doesn't matter where the pipeline is. Pipeline's a pipeline, and oil well's an oil well. How does this jive? Because he seems to be fine with them, at least outside of Canada, in Brookfield when it's his own financial, when he has a financial stake in the game. But as Liberal leader, as Prime Minister, he seems to be status quo, no more pipelines.
Well, there's a very easy answer, Derek, and it goes back to the creation of the Limited Liability Corporation in England back in whenever it was, 1730. If you trade on the stock exchange and you want to get rid of that liability to be personally liable for destroying shareholder value, it is, as a director of a public company, it is your duty, legal fiduciary duty, to manage your investors' money properly in a way that maximizes their returns. And so when he's the director of Brookfield, he has a legal obligation to do due diligence and enhance shareholder value. Well, I guess if you're the prime minister of a so-called nation state, sovereign one, then I guess you're not held to that standard. And shareholder value destruction, comes with the tariff.
I do have to fact check you on one part, though. The first corporation was in Amsterdam.
Yeah, it was a Dutch East Indies company. Where was the first stock market? The Bourse? Was that in Amsterdam?
I'm not sure if that was Amsterdam.
Anyway, I don't know about that. I
first-
don't know if it was a limited liability
The first
corporation.
corporation with traditional shareholders was in Amsterdam.
But I think the limited liability corporation may have been in it.
I don't know.
Anyway,
We'll have to get Rachel Gilmore to check.
Yeah, we'll get Rachel Gilmore.
Okay. Nigel, it hasn't really caught a lot of ton of attention yet in the campaign, but I mean, a lot of his activities at Brookfield have become an issue, gotten a little bit of attention in the legacy press, but not a ton. But he seems to have had no problem with pipelines, at least outside of Canada, when he's running Brookfield. Seems to have a problem here now. But only 2 weeks ago, he seemed to be implying the Liberal Party was changing its position quite definitively to be not maybe as gung-ho about pipelines as the Conservative Party, but to drop its more reactionary opposition to it.
Well, that's certainly what he tried to portray. Because if you are a Liberal leader and you're looking for a fourth term after 3 disastrous terms during which Canada's GDP fell, employment fell, growth fell, you're not going to go out and say, I've got these great programs that are going to destroy growth. However, that is, in fact, he has not fundamentally changed his green interest. He is fundamentally a climate change warrior. And the Liberal Party strategy has always been, we're going to show the rest of the world that you can take a big country like Canada and make it net zero, and that will be our contribution to showing the rest of the world how it's done, because it's all too important, the climate and everything else. What the actual financial angle to that might be, the wealth transfer between North and South, all the stuff you read about in the World Economic Forum, the impoverishment of the people, owning nothing and being happy owning nothing, that's another story. But Mr. Carney, I think, is committed to that vision of Canada as a net zero country, just to show that the rest of the world that it can be done, and that we're the people to do it. We Liberals, we are the good guys. We're not like those terrible Westerners who drive big pickups and work in the oil and energy industry. So that's why he's taken the tack that he's taken. And he is actively trying to deceive the public of Canada that he is there for all of us, that we're going to promote industry. You have to look at his words and ask, what does he really mean by industry? What does he really mean by freedom? What does he really mean by energy? It's
You see, I always saw him as more of a Paul Martin.
no, not at all.
All right. All right. Well, we got to move to our parting shots now.
Okay.
Let's start with you, Cory.
I just want to remind people, actually, for a change out of media, a very serious issue. It's very serious, and it's gotten swept under the rug with so many other issues going on in this election. But that former Liberal candidate, Paul Chang, calling, though, for people to turn in the Conservative candidate to the Chinese Communist Party for a bounty. You can't understate you can't overstate, how dangerous and insane that was, even if it was offhand. I mean, we've got the Chinese diaspora population in Canada where those threats are very real, where their families are being threatened by the Chinese Communist Party overseas. And the reticence that Carney had in ejecting that candidate, I mean, that should have been something within seconds. You say, okay, whoa, you're out the door. That is not something you joke about, particularly as an elected official. Why did it take that much pressure and that much time? Who was he answering to that he would be afraid of a backlash for ejecting somebody who said something as horrific as that? And we should be on this more. But again, it frightens me to think of how quickly our legacy media, who's ready to go to town and go loony, as you said, over somebody saying biological clock, well, this happened. And I mean, this was prior to nomination deadline too. It's easy to get rid of a candidate at that point. It's one thing if you're 3 weeks into the election and you can't replace them. This just didn't make enough news.
Yeah, and the Conservatives have fired 3 candidates in one day. One, I think, for sneezing out of turn. They were firing them for some pretty minor stuff. I think the Conservatives were a bit too trigger happy.
Certainly minor compared to this.
Yeah, they were a bit too trigger happy. Very concerning, though, was I watched the video of this Liberal MP calling for this. Was that the room applauded him. And I'm generally good with bringing in Chinese immigrants. They actually make a pretty good immigrant population. But I think we need to screen a bit more for people who aren't, fine, be Chinese, but not sympathetic to the Chinese Communist Party. Bring in more people from Hong Kong who want no part of it. But it was very concerning to see how many people in that room applauded.
Well, and there was recent news of Canadian citizens being executed in China, even if it was for drug offenses and so on. But that's serious bloody business.
Okay, Nigel, your parting shot.
Well, look, about every 10 minutes I get a text from a concerned conservative who says, how can these polls be right? How can we be even with Mr. Carney? Because Mr. Carney's meetings are like a tea party with your grandmother. He'll fill up a pub or he'll have a couple of hundred people turn out, and he makes these dull, boring speeches. And, a long drink of warm water is more interesting usually. And meanwhile, Pierre Poilievre, I think his opening night was 2,400, packing them into a hotel in Toronto. Like, that's not traditional, strong conservative country. What was it, 4,800? They had to get a hangar in
That was like 6,400.
6,400, all right. Well,
it was almost a hockey game.
Must have been looking at a Liberal press release.
Yeah.
At any rate, doing it down. Look, people are packing the auditoriums to hear what the Conservative leader has got to say. They are not packing even the pubs to hear what the Liberal leader has to say. And if you can't get a crowd where there's beer on tap,
Reporters.
I have, my point, gentlemen, is simply this. I do not trust those polls. It's not reflected by what you see on the ground in the campaign.
All right. Parting shot from Shaun.
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different tack from Nigel here, and I'm going to say it's Mr. Poilievre's dad jokes, sweep the suites, build the house, tax the tax, wash the clothes, pump the pooch. He's out yesterday standing out in in a potato field in Prince Edward Island. He's saying he's outstanding in his field.
Did you just say pump the pooch?
Yeah, we've got a running joke back here.
Put that one on the list there, production.
Jen and I have a running, and then he answers reporters' questions that way. You know, make Canada great for change. You know, like it's just all this canned thing, and I think what's happening is the message is getting lost in this constant blitz of slogans, and he just keeps on adding new ones.
Well, it's getting lost 4,800 people at a time.
We're talking on TV.
Speaking of losing the plot, I'm going to talk a bit about Rachel Gilmore here.
Her favorite.
Fired again. She used to work for Global News. She was fired because she was just wildly uncredible, even by the standards of the old legacy media. Lots of lefties in there, but most of them at least try to cloak their language in at least a veil of neutrality. You know, so you're like, well, is this misogynistic? Should just say, that is misogynistic. Like, and that's fine. I'm not an objective reporter. We've got fair-minded, even-handed reporters working here, and they do that as their job. That's not my job. That's certainly not her job. But CTV hired her to be exactly that in the most extreme form as the fact-checker of CTV News for this election. Well, she had an introduction segment where she's introduced as the fact-checker, and she got immediately fired because of the backlash. And she said this was an attack on freedom of the press.
She attacked me and Jen, she said, when we were denied entry in the...
So when you and Jen and James Snell, other Western Centre reporters, were denied the right to even enter a press conference from Mark Carney. And to its credit, the Canadian Association of Journalists stood up and said, well, that's not good for press freedom. It was a pretty mild statement, but they gave a little spanking to Mark Carney. She says, I'm tearing up my membership. How dare you defend the right of these people to go in and ask questions? They have no right to be there as accredited journalists. So a bit hypocritical. One of item 10,000 of hypocrisy from this person. So, Cory, you had a great show today. You showed some of the video of her crying, leave Rachel Gilmore alone kind of thing. It was pretty delicious. I'm looking at the clock. I'm just going to sneak this one in real quick. Double parting shot. The Toronto Star, the brilliant guys of the Toronto Star, dug up some real dirt on Pierre Poilievre and said that he, big critic of Mark Carney's Brookfield, in fact, owns Brookfield. Well, when you read down towards the bottom of the article, he has investments on an index, of which some of the dozens of companies on it is Brookfield. So I scratched my head and said, oh, that's pretty funny. And so I asked, you and Jen look into this. Turns out every single Canadian who's ever worked in a salary job or wage job in Canada also owns Brookfield.
Unless you live in Quebec.
Unless you live in Quebec, yeah. Well, maybe even they do too. We didn't check them. But if you have any CPP, you own Brookfield. And even better, we found, was it you, either you or Jen found, that Stephen Guilbeault, the radical environment minister of Justin Trudeau, and now I think heritage minister again under Mark Carney, he owns Suncor Oil Sands.
And Canadian Natural.
And Canadian Natural Resources.
Which is one of the biggest holdings of the CPP.
Yeah, but not just CPP. He owns, by the definition of the Toronto Star, saying Pierre Poilievre owns some Brookfield, Stephen Guilbeault owns some CNRL and Suncor. So,
and Pembina Pipe, and Enbridge, and TC Energy.
That's very racist. You got to stop there. Okay, enough misogyny and racism for today. Thank you all for joining us on this lovely Wednesday during our election. Remember, if you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, you need to stop freeloading. The Western Standard is one of the only media outlets left in Canada not taking the Trudeau-Carney federal media bailout. We're supported by people like you. Go to westernstandard.news right now. Click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year, and you'll get unlimited access to all Western Standard content. So much of it. Huge Western Standard content. You're going to get past that pesky paywall and support the Western Standard. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless.
What does success mean to you? Peace of mind? Financial freedom? Generational wealth? What do you see in your future? Investing in gold and silver can help you get there. Through our trading partners, New World Precious Metals offers safe, affordable, secure international accounts to help you meet your unique financial goals. Connect with one of our experienced team members. Invest in gold and silver today.